Yeah, that's what Dakota was saying. That's a big one.
Turn her out. Like her granddaughter.
Yeah. He said that, like the back of it, like almost like, it's big old guy.
He just couldn't learn to bend down.
Once he found out what it was there.
Oh, but Chris,
right, brethren, we're past due. Past time. You know, I got here 15 minutes earlier today than I normally do. Still behind. We're in Psalms 59, talking about David. You can see I don't believe he does this all the time, but our author actually put the superscription in this one, I guess, because that's how a lot of people date this psalm. It says, to the chief musician, set to do not destroy, a Michtam of David, when Saul sent men, and they watched the house in order to kill him. Now, we don't know that that statement is true. The one thing that I can tell you about the superscriptions is that they're very old. They've been around 1,000 years. So it kind of fits, but you don't have to handcuff yourself and say that is, well, Linda Getter, boy, is it good to see you. You look pretty this morning. Or maybe it's just because you walked by Ken. I make everybody look better when I walk in. Psalms 59 says, deliver me from my enemies, O my God. Defend me from those who rise up against me. Deliver me from the workers of iniquity, and save me from bloodthirsty men. They lie in wait for my life. The mighty gather against me, not for my transgressions, nor for my sin, O Lord. In other words, he's saying, I haven't really done anything to merit this treatment. Who does that remind you of? Who? I'm sorry, did you say something, Dakota? Okay, who does that remind you of? What's that? Oh, okay. It reminds me of Jesus, right? If you ever had somebody who wasn't deserving of what happened to him. David, of course, is not claiming sinless, but he's saying, there's such things for capital crimes. You can say what you want to, but I was in the service, and I hung around a bunch of guys, and we had guns. We also had general orders, okay? And there were certain times when you could use what is called deadly force. That whole Ashley Babbitt's thing, that was not a time. If I weigh 250 pounds and I have a 110-pound woman coming through a window, instead of putting a 45 around her chest, I think I'll just go push her back through it, since how the entire SWAT team was coming up the stairs at that point in time. There's a time that you deserve the punishment that you get. I saw where some man, which is foolishness, but he just received a 470-year life. Did you see that? 470 years. Yeah, dog fighting. You can kill a man and you can be out of prison in less than 10 years, but you fight some dogs and you're going to spend 470 years. We all know that that's a death sentence, don't we? What was that? 475. Yeah, absolutely. That's just, we're really going to show these people, man, we're going to, 400, that's a joke, isn't it? We all know that that's just really outrageous. But the punishment needs to fit the crime, and there are capital crimes. The Bible recognized about 12 capital crimes, including homosexuality. That was a capital crime during the theocracy of Israel. Not too much reinforced after that. And then you had a lot of cultures, of course, who never had that kind of thing. But he says, I haven't done anything worthy. It's just like Paul says, if I have done something worthy of death, I refuse not to die. And so, if David had been guilty of some crime, I'm sure he'd have been of the same mindset. And this does fit pretty good, with him being let down a window by his wife, who was Saul's daughter, Michal. He says, awake to help me. Well, look at verse 4. They run to prepare themselves through no fault of mine. Awake to help me, and behold, you therefore, O Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, awake to punish all the nations. Do not be merciful to any wicked transgressor. So that's an interesting transition, isn't it? He goes from a very personal prayer, from delivering me, to deliver us all. Well, you can really appreciate that. It says, at evening, they return, they growl like a dog. It's funny, we were just talking about that, because a man was sentenced to for dog fighting to 475 years. Yet the Bible doesn't talk very fondly of dogs. As a matter of fact, in the Old Testament, dogs were creatures that, they were around because you couldn't get rid of them, kind of like varmint, kind of like coyotes. They'd roam the streets sometimes, and they were deadly. Small children and stuff, you wouldn't want they were not domesticated. Of course, by the time of the New Covenant, we find Jesus using an illustration of a situation where dog life had sort of changed. He says it's not proper to give the dogs the children's food, And the lady, but the word he uses is not talking about just some mutt running outside, loose. It's a lap dog, because the lady turns right around and uses the same word and says, "But Lord, do not the little dogs, do they not catch the what? Crumbles that fall from the table." So obviously they're not outside running around the street. These were domesticated dogs, and so we can see the difference there. But remember, the Old Testament's a little bit different. And apparently this lady and Jesus, people had domesticated animals far more. Well, that thing started back. Did you go up and start that slideshow again, Dakota? I had it stuck on that one slide. You heathen, you did that, didn't you? Yeah, be sure thy sins will find thee out. Yeah, just freeze it, or you can go ahead and give me a black screen. That'll be fine. Thank you. I didn't know you was up there, man. Y'all are like ninjas up there. Never know when you're going to be around. It says, "But you, O Lord," notice what he says. "Indeed, they belch with their mouths, swords are in their lips, for they say, who hears?" In other words, we can say what we want to, we can act like we want to. Who's going to hold us accountable? Verse 8, "But you, O Lord, shall laugh at them." That's not the first time in Psalms we find that language. God is depicted many times of laughing at men's interests or desires to harm him. Remember what God said about if he was hungry? He says, "If I was hungry, I would not tell you." And he says, "Don't you understand that the cattle of 1,000 hills are mine? What are you going to do, to help me eat?" So just another recognizing God's power. He says, "I will wait for you, O you his strength, for God is my defense. My God of mercy shall come to meet me. He shall let me see my desire on my enemies. Do not slay them, lest my people forget. Scatter them by your power and bring them down, O Lord, our shield." That's an interesting thing there. You maybe could try to date it a little bit with that. David saying, don't, completely eradicate my enemy. So the people will remember. That almost makes you feel as though he's king, and is wanting them to be around for like a testament or an example. I just found that interesting, got kind of hung up on that a little bit. Not sure exactly what he's talking about there, other than don't kill them, but keep them from killing me for sure. Verse 12, for the sin of their mouth and the words of their lips, let them ever be taken in their pride. And for cursing and lying, which they speak, consume them in wrath, consume them, that they may not be, and let them know that God rules in Jacob to the ends of the earth. At the end of thy return, they growl like at evening they return, it's almost like these same dogs have returned, but now instead of having power and being deadly and so forth, they're more like desperate need. They're running around scrounging, if you will. It says, they wander up and down for food and howl if they are not satisfied. Verse 16, complete change. "But I will sing of your power. Yes, I will sing aloud of your mercies in the morning, for you have been my defense and refuge in the day of trouble. To you, O strength, I will sing praises, for God is my defense, God, my God of mercy." Well, it's a beautiful song. We see a whole lot going on in there. I'm not sure exactly why he chose this psalm. It's a little bit more difficult to me in the arrangement of it, but hey, we'll run with it. Notice that Scripture is filled with statements about deliverance. Of course, Jacob wanted to be delivered from his brother, no doubt about it. God promised deliverance, the Israelites, from their enemies in Deuteronomy 7. Samuel reminded the people of God's willingness to deliver them if they would turn away from their idolatry. Time and time again, that is the thesis statement of the Old Testament, if you will. Turn away from idols, follow God. But time and time again, we see this same group of individuals right up to the time of Christ, always having a problem putting something in front of God. It says one of the most familiar examples of God's willingness to deliver his people is, of course, Daniel chapter 3. Those three young men had already made up their mind they were not going to bow down to Nebuchadnezzar's statue. I think it's interesting that we find that in Daniel chapter 3, because in Daniel chapter 2, we have the dream of the statue, right? And so there have been some questions as to what exactly that statue might have been. It seems like that was a pretty significant event in Nebuchadnezzar's life, so why not a statue like we saw? Well, anyway, or saw in chapter 2. Anyway, it's a huge statue, but these boys said, we're not going to do that. That's idolatrous. And so the king says, oh, yes, you're going to do this. And they're saying like, well, no, we're not. And then the king says, well, you're going to, I'm going to kill you. And they say, no, well, that's fine. If the God wants to deliver us, he'll deliver us. But if no matter, we're not going to bow down to your statue, because that's against God. And so they do exactly that. 3 go in. Nebuchadnezzar sees 4. And you remember the one, he said it was like as unto the Son of Man. And so came out not smelling like smoke. Now, I need to have a fire at the house. I had one a couple weeks ago. And that was the smelliest fire I believe I've ever burnt. Man, it was in my hair. It was on my clothes. You ever have one of those where, I don't know why particularly, but that one just really smelled. A lot of old rose bush. It was really bad. But to come out of a fire and not smell like smoke, I mean, Nebuchadnezzar has lost some good men. He's just lost, soldiers who had to take those boys up there to throw them in the furnace. That it was so hot that it killed them. And instead of, saying, boy, what about those guys? You think about, he's interested in these 3, wanting to know how in the world they were delivered. And of course, you'd think he'd have picked up on that with Daniel chapter 2 and his dream being interpreted. And then here in Daniel chapter 3, these young men living in a situation that they should have died. You'd think that would have made a huge impression on Nebuchadnezzar, but we find him in chapter 4 getting back into the same mess of pride. And then, of course, God takes his mind away from him for a period of time. Well, keeping that same mind, talking about deliverance, in the New Testament, Jesus taught his followers to pray for deliverance from the evil one. Deliverance. I've heard men pray that God, you would test us, that you would tempt us, that you would try us. I'm going to hang with Jesus on that one, Deliver us from temptation. Lord, I realize I'm weak. I caution any man that thinks he needs to have more trials in his life just so he can prove to Jesus who he is, that maybe he's looking at that maybe the wrong way. They will come. You don't have to ask for them. They'll be there. There's Goliath on the valley of Elah waiting for us all. But anyway, Jesus said, deliver us from. Paul says, there hath no temptation taken you, but which is such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will with the temptation deliver us, so that we may be able to bear up under it, or to go through that trial or that test. That's the attitude. That's what I need. I need to be reminded of that, because sometimes when you're going through things, you're just, I just don't know how much more of this I can take. You're going to be okay. God is not going to put more on you than you can go through. He's promised us that. These passages remind us that the assistance and protection of God offers his people today go well beyond the physical. Remember, he gives us that spiritual armor, the shield of faith, the helmet of salvation, the feet shod to the preparation of the spread of the gospel. We have that, the shield of righteousness, quench those fiery darts. But we've got to wear that. We've got to put it on. God provides it, but it's his armor. We wear it, but we need to utilize it. Notice Psalm 59 contains a plea from David for deliverance. According to the superscription, which we've already read, it was written while Saul was king. You can choose to, really put your hat on that, or you can realize we just really don't know. In this particular time, if that is the case, notice his prayer was answered when Michal, without the E, Saul's youngest daughter, lets David, down from a window, and then makes a dummy-like thing in the bed. So when the men come in, they'll see that and think that David hasn't escaped, giving him an opportunity to run, if you will. This is the same Michael who, is later given to another man, and then as a prerequisite for peace between Abner and David, the southern kingdom, those who departed with Jeroboam and those who, that's the wrong place. Those who were going with King Saul's son, he says, I can fix this, but David says, well, before you do that, I need my wife back. And you remember Abner goes and gets Michal and is delivering her to David, and her husband at that time is following behind and crying after her and pretty upset about it. But, Abner tells him, you best go back or something bad's going to happen to you. So Michal goes back to David and becomes his wife. She was his wife to begin with. But you remember that she sees him dancing and apparently not acting the part of a king that she thinks he ought to act. And, gets on to David about that, and he chastises her. And he never has relations with her again. And she dies childless, which is a pretty tough thing, for Jewish women. So that's a kind of a tragic story of her life. That's what happens when you have changes of government, isn't it? You have changes of kings. From my enemies, David's cry to God, notice, for help was urgent. His foes were workers of iniquity. They were bloodthirsty men. And you know how fellows can be. Some men are killers. And I like to watch cop shows about homicide detectives. I always thought that was something I could do if I, ever had done something else, because they speak for those who can't speak for themselves. But I think one of the statements one of the policemen made one time is he says, murderers don't look like murderers. They look like everybody else. Some people have it in them to pull the trigger or to stab or to fight or to do something like that, and others don't. And so I would like to think that I am not somebody who behaves in such a way, but I've never really understood people who did. Those, when you read those articles or see those shows about people who, that's what they do. They're serial killers. I mean, they go from place to place just taking life, and I'm like, how on earth could anybody find enjoyment in that? But I just don't know, but I know that they're out there. And so here are these bloodthirsty men. Sometimes you have to be careful where you are and who you're fooling with, because some people don't handle discrepancies and differences like other folks. So, brother, that's something, what did Solomon say about grabbing a dog by the ears? Some things you just need to stay away from. And anyway, whether it says David thought God was unaware of his situation, we all know that God was fully aware of David's situation, right? God's totally aware of mine and your situation. But he asks us to pray anyway, doesn't he? That's one of the things I've often fooled myself with, I guess you could say, in not praying like I should, because I feel like, well, God already knows. Well, God already knows. God knows everything. But what did he tell us? Pray about it. Lay all your cares on him. Yes, there are some medicinal qualities in, anybody ever heard of therapy? Well, if you haven't, you haven't been around for 20 years. Everybody's in it or needs one. And I'm like, wow, it's amazing. I'm not even going to go into that. I've always been kind of somebody that, you got to, it's you, man. You got to change your mindset. But nowadays, people, and talking helps. But what does the Bible say? Confess your faults to one another. We're to be a support group, and I think sometimes we don't take advantage of that. We'd rather go pay somebody, I guess, because they have to sign a non-disclosure agreement. they can't tell anybody about it. So perhaps there's solace in that. It would be great if we could have relationships as brethren where we feel comfortable enough to talk about our personal situations and be able to grasp the benefit of somebody who's been around more years than we and can help us navigate some of those circumstances that they have gone through. I know we have several people here in this congregation who have navigated the waters of the loss of a spouse. You know, recently, I think of Brother Newby, and you know, that's just a life-changing and a life-altering situation that, I mean, you could go see a therapist, but I bet the best thing you could do is talk to a man that's been through that to help you navigate that. Not that that's a situation any of us want to go through, but it just makes sense that that will be a situation that all of us will go through. Did y'all ever know Sister Patterson lived over here right before you get to Hooker, top of the hill there? You know, you leave by what used to be Granny's Restaurant, and you go up that big hill, last road on the right before you top it. Y'all know her name was Patterson. She had a son. What was that? You know, I just knew her as Sister Patterson. Didn't have a son named, boy, I can't remember his name. Isn't that pitiful? Well, anyway, she outlived 2 or 3 husbands. And we knew her. She was an old widower. You know, she just loved having me and Stephanie. We were kids, so she just loved having us over there. And we loved going over there because she treated us like adults, you know. And but the last marriage, she was at the top of the hill there in Rossville, going by the old duck pond, and had they believe, a massive heart attack. That little fella she had married, Sister Patterson's a good-sized woman, you know. And she married this little bitty fella who was members there at Rossville. And, I mean, this is not a funny story, but she had a massive heart attack or something, hit the gas and flew down that hill wide open into a brick wall. Killed, you know, both of them instantaneous. And I always thought that, you know, that probably wasn't a good 3 or 4 seconds there, but it was painless after that, you know, no death of a spouse, no... I think of the gospel preacher that just died, Larry Acuff, preached for like 400 years. He was 84, I think 85. He just retired in November, you know, and massive heart attack, just like that. And I thought, it's what I pray for. You know, I pray for quickness. Don't we all? Who prays for 20 years in a nursing facility, not being able to feed yourself? I don't think any of us. Yeah, Chris?
I just lost a cousin who was a teacher in South Africa.
I'm sorry.
2 months ago, and he's been supported there by a congregation in Nashville. Even his wife came out, he has been persistent, and while he was preparing his lesson in the evening, she went out to family first, I don't know their call away. While she was gone, he went to his little truck working on his lesson, and when he didn't come out in the morning to normal coffee, the host was in there and found him with his Bible laying over his there, and he just had an actual death in his bed. And you were talking about people that dying in a peaceful way and no known illnesses that they were aware of or at least mindful of.
That's a great way to go. You know, if I could, you know, make a...
Especially in the ways preparing,
Yeah.
preparing for a lesson for the next day.
Yeah.
Oh, going through it.
You know, I think about that, and it's a tremendous tragedy, and I hate to see young people die. I hate to see anybody die. But that plane crash, you know, with the helicopters, and that was pretty instantaneous. You know, the good thing is very little, I would think, suffering or not knowing what, you know, I would like to think like, whew, man, is this paradise? You know, is that Abraham over there? You know, I guess you'd notice on the way in of the flight with the angels, right? But that wouldn't be a bad thing. I think most of us, if we lived any time at all, have contemplated that moment. And the only dread that I have is either learning to live without somebody or worrying about what they're going to do without me. And knowing what a burden I am to bear, I bet you they're going to do great, you know. So maybe that's not even something to think about. Notice David's enemies initially struck fear in his heart. Boy, don't that happen? Immediately your mind starts to go and it's racing, and you think of all these different things that can happen or may happen, and you forget that God's in control and it's going to be okay. He'll take care of it. Their boast, of course, David would say, God laughs at. What are they going to do with their swords and their chariots and their spears and their hatred? And they're not going to do anything to the God of heaven. I've always thought, I've never heard it come out of a man's mouth, but I've heard people tell me of men who have said things like, you wait till I see God. I thought, yeah, you wait till you see God. Because whatever you think's going on in your head, it ain't going to be going on. You are going to stand before, well, I don't even know how to picture that really. You know, I've looked at the pictures of the throne room from Revelations 4 and 5. I look at Isaiah's account, Isaiah, 6? Ezekiel's account, Ezekiel 1. You know, and those men are, you know, they stop in their tracks, if you will. Just Paul won't even tell you what he saw. He just tells you about what he heard. Then tells you he can't tell you what he heard. But it was pretty marvelous to be in the presence of God. Well, he says, I will wait for you, O you his strength, for God is my defense. Notice that word defense there. He gives us about 3 different translations there. New King James calls it defense, but the ESV calls it a fortress. New American Standard calls it my stronghold. David expressed complete confidence in God's ability to protect, assist, and provide. God is his deliverer. It says, rather than asking God to slay his enemies quickly. Now, this was the part, you know, the part I got hung up a little bit on and spent a little time with it, and just certainly doesn't seem like the situation where he's just been delivered by Michael, you know, in the superscription there. It seems to me like it's something he wants people to see the example of, so I'm not sure. But anyway, it says David asked God to make an example of them. David was certain his enemies deserved punishment because of their prideful, cursing, and lying language. He was even more confident in the Lord's ability to let them know that God rules in Jacob. The plans are no match for the power of God. God for defense, deliverance, and salvation. And so, actually, I'm looking at the wrong thing. After God, that's the end of it. Okay. That, to me, I just kind of wrestle with that, about being during the time of that deliverance by Michael and Saul's men. It looked to me more like as David is king, and he's having some trouble with other nations, because, you know, he's even mentioned deliverance from the nations. And so that tying in with that, wouldn't argue that, but I had a hard time getting that to flow with what the superscription says about when the event occurred. Any thoughts on that? Because your guess is as good as mine. I don't think we can prove it either way. What about I will sing? Oh, man, what a great heart-pouring, heart-emptying salve. You know, you can pour out your heart and you can empty yourself. You know, there's an old honky-tonk song written by a fellow by the name of Bob Seger. I wouldn't recommend anything hardly the song says, but one of the things he says is you put out all your energy, you know, into the music that you play. If you sing and you really sing out and you're putting yourself into it, there's a release there. There's a satisfaction. There's a well, I don't know how else to say it other than a relief, a release. You know, you're pleading with God, you're telling each other, you're singing his praises, and you hear other people who are excited, and so there's a corporate sense in which we are celebrating God's greatness, our salvation, the Jesus, the Christ, what he went through. There's just so many things, and we're doing it together. And sometimes it sounds pretty good too, don't it? You know, you have that self-satisfaction of the joy of the music, music to our ears. And so when David says, I will sing, I just can't imagine him out there watching them sheep kind of sort of whispering, you know, stuff. Don't you just hear him bellowing? I mean, just letting it out. I used to have this tunnel underneath our barracks that we used to, where all the guns were, and you'd have to pull armor duty, like anybody's going to go down there. But anyway, they needed to make us do something, right? 12 hours a day. So every now and then you'd draw guard duty down there, and the acoustics were wonderful. I could whistle, and it sounded like a marching band, you know? And there'd be times I could sing, and, you know, and it would come back to, you know what I'm saying? So you've been in the echo place before, right? You start doing Tarzan yells or something, you know, there's something about it that it's just fun, and it releases, and it's exciting. And then you put the aspect of singing to God, and some of the songs that we sing, it just, you can see why David's called the sweet psalmist of Israel. I'm sorry, Ken, you got something?
Yeah, you think about Paul and Silas in prison singing, I don't think that they were whispering. I don't know if they made anybody around them mad or anything that was there. Apparently they all seemed to enjoy it. And but the way they were singing was quite loud, I would think, as they were in prison there.
Have you ever been out somewhere, and I mean like out somewhere, you ain't watching TV, you ain't got no phone, and somebody picks up a guitar, or just somebody just starts singing? Or what does everybody in that group generally do? You pay attention, don't you? I mean, even if you don't even know what language, you know, what language they're singing in. You know, it's there's something about it. You know, when Saul was having his problems, mental instability, they would bring in minstrels, and that's how, you know, David meets Saul. And there's something soothing in it. You know, I like to listen to music, but I don't listen to heavy metal when I'm doing sermons or trying to, you know, do something like that. But I will listen to Vivaldi and, you know, some of those classic, you know, Beethoven and stuff like that, which I couldn't tell you one from the other. I was never classically trained. But it's calming, you know, and so you can do work by that. But then there is a time for metal, you know. There's a time when you're trying to get that next set. Not as often now as when I was younger, but you're trying to do a few more exercises, you know, and so that music, techno music or whatever, really helps you out. So music's a part of our lives. It really, if you're not into music much, guarantee your children or your grandchildren are. It is really young people stirred by music. And yes, sir.
Two things. Number one, I saw a TV program last night where they showed you for all these guys with the cows. They say a cow is more milk when you play classical music to it. So there you go. Ivan is now going to put you.
Yeah, I was thinking Johnny's going to take his generator out in the field somewhere and play lullabies to his cows now. That's going to be great, Johnny. You didn't even know that, did you? Huh? Of course, you ain't got milk cows, so.
Okay, the other story is also what Ken said. First time when I read the story of Paul and Silas singing to one another, I couldn't help but relate it to Ephesians chapter 5:9 and Colossians 3:16, when he said, when sin makes melody in your heart and you sing to one another. I think that was not only to have the voice appeared, but also to encourage one another while they were sitting in a terrible situation.
Oh, yeah.
Must have been very strengthening.
Yeah. Don't you know, I mean, the prisoners in there with them, that would have been a relief. I mean, I bet you they didn't hear singing every night. In fact, they probably just heard moans and groans and, you know, people in misery. And then to hear people that are in the same misery that you are, and yet they are praising God and obviously talking about things such as salvation. I don't think the jailer just came up with that. That's pretty good stuff. And so, brethren, I know I'm talking to the creme of the creme here, but we need to encourage our people to be singers. One of the things we do is have that Sunday night singing. I think that's so important in that we have a time to learn new songs, a time to just really sing and not worry about lesson time and stuff like that. I really like the Sunday night singings. Applications, excuse me. It says David's petition in Psalms 59 illustrates what we can do facing difficult situations. Didn't ask for special treatment. He didn't deserve the treatment he faced. If he had deserved, he wouldn't have objected. But some of the things that I liked about the sermon was, the psalm was, he kind of gives us some ideas. Pray for ourselves, but also pray for our nation, and and thankfulness. Enter his gates with thanksgiving in our hearts. Real quickly, the questions: from whom did David ask to be delivered? His enemies, right? How did David describe these individuals? Bloody men, yeah, workers of iniquity. What did David claim to be in them, so to speak? You got to read it a couple times, and then, in a way, he's saying that I'm not deserving of what's taking place here. I'm innocent, and I haven't done anything worthy of death, if you will. What did David ask God to do? Don't extend your mercy to the heathen, right? To what did David compare his enemies? A dog. Nowadays, there's a lot of people who take that as a high compliment. Isn't that amazing? It says, how did David anticipate God's responding to his enemies? He laugh at him. They're not going to do anything to him. And why did David want to slay his foes? Not to slay his foes. Yeah, so the people would remember him. Boy, I'm just intrigued by that. And, I'm like you. This will be the last time I look at this for years. So that's not something I'm going to go home and, open up and study about some more. But you ever do that during your daily Bible reading? You got X amount of passages you want to look at, and then you go like, man, I need to go back and look at that. And then next year when you're doing your daily Bible reading, you go, I really want to go back and look at that. Sometimes I guess it'd be better just to stop and do it, right? What did David promise to do in response to his deliverance? Sing. Yeah. Sing of God's prayer. Sing of God's power. Number one there on that discussion, I just thought that was interesting. What can Christians learn from David's prayer? Well, we can learn how to pray, right? Watch everything was written 4 times, written for our learning. Obviously, this was pretty acceptable to God. It's been put into the Holy Writ, inspired by the Holy Spirit. I'd say there's some things we can learn from that, wouldn't you? Brethren, I've enjoyed it. We'll be in this a few more weeks. March 1st, we'll be looking at a new series of lessons on talking about where he was. It's talking about the Christ and the various cities. To give you an idea, you're going to spend the last 5 lessons are in Jerusalem. But Bethany, Cana, some of those cities that jump out in the New Testament where Jesus spent some time. So we'll be looking at that. But we got a few more weeks left in the Psalms. Hope you're enjoying from it and learning from it. I know I have. I never have looked at Psalm 59 like we've looked at it today. Never took the time. Just one of those I kind of, just haven't spent time with. What's that? Oh, yeah. If you don't have pain, you don't know your appendix ruptured. Yeah. Yeah, remember what God told Paul. My grace is sufficient for you. Because he is really wanting to get rid of whatever that thorn was. And God said, no, in weakness, I'm stronger. It's really the opposite way we feel of it. Think about it. And let's have a prayer, and then we'll dismiss for a few minutes. Our Father in heaven, Lord God, thankful for this day, thankful for this opportunity to talk about this psalm, Father, and pray that we've learned something, particularly in how to pray, the glory of singing, and just a little more about your wisdom and requesting us to do these various things that sometimes we take for granted in our singing and our praying. Lord, continue to help us get stronger, to be better examples, and to be a comfort to our brethren. In Jesus' name, amen. All righty, thank you. Well, you don't look like you got no tan.